let's talk peptides for a little bit. The good, the hype, the FDA, and the research use only problem. I mean, I'd say over the last 6 weeks, we've had more questions I've had than compared with the last 3 years, but we're getting more questions, so I just want to do a expansion on peptides. The FDA is going to talk about reclassification of a few, so I just kind of wanted to give a video update. With everything seeming like peptides are new, I wanted to just kind of break into them a little bit. But really, they're not that new. Social media is acting like they just showed up 3 months ago wearing a backwards hat and carrying a Stanley Cup. Really, I feel like I need to tear the sleeves off or be in a tank top to talk about peptides. I feel like all the influencers are doing it shirtless or in a tank top, but they've been around a long time. Insulin is a peptide. It's been around for decades. The GLP-1 medications are a peptide. There's other ones out there, tirzepatide, PT141 like bremanolitide or Vyleesi. Those are both peptide medications, and so they're not some new underground biohacker secret. They are a structural category. But that's also one of the confusing parts. Whenever we talk about most medications, we usually talk about the drug class. We say beta blocker, statin, antihistamine, SSRI, antibiotic. Both peptides, we're often just saying peptides, which is kind of like saying I'm taking a medication made of molecules. Cool. That narrows it down to medicine. Peptides can do wildly different things depending on their structure and the receptors or pathways they interact with. Some affect metabolism, some affect appetite, some affect growth hormone signaling. Some are being studied for inflammation, tissue repair, sleep, cognition, longevity, and so they have various uses. And so when someone says, do peptide work, that's kind of like asking, do medications work? Which one? For what? At what dose? From what source? And what patient? And that's a real conversation. So the peptides are not new. Social media is just late. I started using peptides clinically in around 2022, and even then I felt a little late to the game. There are already providers, compounding pharmacies, athletes, longevity clinics, functional medicine clinics, hormone clinics using peptides before that. But now social media has discovered them, and when social media discovers something, it immediately turns into two things. One, a miracle cure, and two, a discount code. So now patients are seeing, take this peptide for fat loss, take this peptide for healing, take this peptide for sleep, take this peptide for anti-aging. Take this peptide because some guy with abs and a ring light said mitochondria. And look, some of these peptides are genuinely interesting. I like peptides. I think peptides are great. We have been using them. And I think we're going to continue to use them, and they're going to continue to have tons of medical uses. But we need to separate into three different things: what's biologically plausible, what's clinically proven, and what's being marketed like it came down from Mount Olympus in a refrigerated vial. They're not the same things. So what happened in 2023? In 2023, the FDA's handling of many compounded peptides changed the landscape pretty abruptly. We were going along, and then all of a sudden, several of the peptides were placed into a higher risk category for compounding concerns, which made access through traditional accredited compounding pharmacies much more limited. Reuters described the 2023 restrictions as affecting 14 peptides over concerns including immunogenicity, toxicity, impurities, and insufficient human testing. And that happened fast. I mean, for patients in clinic, it really honestly felt like it was overnight. One day, many of these peptides were available through compounding pharmacies, and then suddenly access became extremely limited. And now the FDA has announced on July 23rd and 24th that the Pharmacy Compounding Advisory Committee is going to meet to discuss whether several of these peptides should be considered for inclusion on the 503A bulks list, which means the compounding pharmacies can start compounding them more readily again. And so it's scheduled to discuss BPC-157, KPV, TB500, and MOTS-c. On the 24th, it's scheduled to discuss Emilamitide, which is also known as DSIP, Semax, and Epithalon. This doesn't mean that these are automatically approved. It means they're being reviewed. And that matters because what we've created in the meantime is basically a prohibition-style access problem. When something becomes harder to get through legitimate medical channels, demand doesn't magically disappear. People just go looking elsewhere. And that's exactly what happened. So the prohibition effect, this is the part I think regulators sometimes underestimate. Whenever you remove access through accredited compounding pharmacies, you don't necessarily remove demand, you just push it into worse places. It's the prohibition effect. When something becomes restricted, it often becomes more desirable. People start thinking, well, if they restricted it, it must be powerful. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. Sometimes restriction means there are legitimate safety questions, there's not enough human data, there are manufacturing concerns, or the regulatory system is not caught up with clinical interest. But patients don't always interpret it that way. Patient sees harder to get, must be special. And then they end up buying a vial online labeled research use only and not for human use. Either of those are kind of how they're bypassing these laws currently, which is hilarious and also terrifying because we're all just now independent mouse laboratories now, except the mouse is you. The research chemical or not for human use problem is where I get concerned. We use them, they do very well, and we have a lot of success with them. But I am against people injecting mystery powders into their body because someone named Peptide King _alpha had a Memorial Day promo code. If I'm injecting something into my body, I want to know, is it sterile? Is it the compound it claims to be? Is the dose accurate? Are there endotoxins? Does it contain heavy metals? Was it manufactured appropriately? Was it stored correctly? Does it have third-party testing to know that all of these have been monitored and maintained? Who is accountable if something goes wrong? And it's not being dramatic, it's just basic common sense, especially whenever we're talking about compounds that you inject into your body. The FDA itself lists concerns with several compounded peptides, including immunogenicity, aggregation, peptide-related impurities, and limited or absent human safety data for some routes of administration. Now, let's compare that to the research chemical world. And sometimes people are getting a white powder shipped to their house. No clear labeling, no standardized instruction, no medical oversight. Then they're expected to reconstitute themselves, calculate the concentration, figure out the dose, decide the frequency, store it correctly, and inject it safely. That's a lot. We've had problems where we guide patients with this, and these are educated patients, and they still can do it wrong. And so I can tell you as well, people who are doing this, they often come to us for help asking with these products, and they describe their dosing in wildly different ways. They'll say, I'm taking 20 units, okay? Of what concentration? I'm taking half a syringe. That's not even a real dose. I'm taking 2 clicks. From what pin? I'm taking 5 marks. On what syringe? Are you using a syringe? And, I mixed the powder with the water it came with. How much water? I don't know. The TikTok said to do it. Great. So now we're just doing pharmacology by vibes. The actual dose is usually described in milligrams, micrograms, sometimes international units depending on the compound. But if the person does not know the concentration they created, then the units on the syringe isn't going to tell me really anything. Units are a volume measurement on an insulin or a syringe. They are not automatically a medication dose. That confusion matters because small errors can create big dosing differences. And with research products, you may not even know if the vial contains what it says it's going to contain in the first place. So let's just get back to this. Peptides are medications. That's the key point. Again, peptides can be amazing. I love them, but they are still medications. They deserve a real discussion. Risk-benefit alternative treatment analysis, appropriate sourcing, appropriate dosing, monitoring when needed, labs when appropriate, and realistic expectations. They should not be freely handed out by your hairdresser or realtor with a discount code. In disrespect to hairdressers or realtors, they're great at what they do. They do hair good, but I just don't want my peptide protocol, hormone protocol, and endotoxin risk assessment handled while someone is foiling highlights or hosting an open house. I like peptides, and I'm excited for this as they will hopefully become more accessible so that we can further offer various options through accredited compounding pharmacies. So let's break down the ones that are being discussed. And I've made videos over several of these, but I'm going to just kind of hit it again. And again, peptides are just short change of amino acids, and based off the changes, what effect they have on the body. And so let's talk with one that's super popular, BPC-157. It's one of the most popular peptides in the wellness and recovery world. It's commonly discussed for soft tissue injuries, tendon irritation, joint discomfort, gut support, and just overall general recovery. And the reason people are excited about it is pretty understandable. A lot of adults are beat up. They lift, they run, they work, they parent, they sleep poorly, and then wonder why their elbow feels like it filed for divorce. So when the peptide is discussed for tissue repair and inflammation modulation, people pay attention. And so we use BPC-157 now, and again, if they can make it more accessible, it's only going to benefit everybody. So BPC-157 can be used as a recovery support tool, especially people dealing with stubborn soft tissue issues or inflammatory gut type concerns, assuming it'll be available through appropriated regulated pathways. It is not something I would pitch as inject this and your torn rotator cuff becomes 22 again. That's nonsense. But part of a bigger recovery plan, definitely interesting. And so the right patient is not someone doing nothing and hoping the peptide fixes everything. The right patient is someone also working on rehab, physical therapy, training modification, protein intake, sleep, inflammation drivers, body composition, overall recovery. The big limitation is the gap between preclinical enthusiasm and strong human clinical outcome data. A lot of the excitement is based on animal data, mechanisms, and anecdotal reports. And that doesn't mean it's useless. It just means we need to be honest. Anecdotes are data, and we're getting really millions of anecdotes right now, but we just don't have the long-term human randomized control trials that we need. We just need more data. And so my patient-facing framework would be BPC is promising for recovery and tissue support, but it should be used as an adjunct, not a guaranteed repair button. The next one is TB500. It's usually talked about in the same breath as BPC-157 and even combined together for the Wolverine stack. And it's also used for wound healing, soft tissue recovery, mobility, muscle or tendon irritation, and injury recovery. Where BPC-157 gets discussed more for localized repair and gut-related interests, TB500 is often framed more broadly around tissue remodeling and recovery signaling. So where I see its potential, and we're already using it here, but is useful in active patients who are trying to recover while they're trying to stay functional. It could be lifters, runners, busy parents, workers with repetitive strain, or people who are trying to become professional athletes but would like their knee to stop sounding like a haunted door. The positive use case is not superhuman healing. The positive use case is supporting recovery pathways while someone is doing the other things correctly. Again, we just need better human data. The FDA's current review process is looking at these substances for possible compounding access, but it's not the same as they have. The FDA's current review process is looking at these substances for possible compounding access, but this is not the same as saying they have FDA approval for broad clinical use. So I would describe TB500 as being useful and biologically interesting, but something that, again, we can't just say is proven because we don't have the human randomized control trials to say such a strong statement. Does have a future in recovery and wound healing support, but the marketing is currently ahead of the evidence. The next one that is still kind of in the same realm of healing and everything is KPV. It's one of the peptides I think is interesting because the use case is easy to understand. It's generally discussed for inflammation, gut health, skin inflammation, immune modulation, and wound healing. KPV is related to alpha MSH signaling, which is part of why people are talking about it in inflammatory conditions. And so inflammation is a huge part of what people struggle with that can cause gut issues, skin flares, joint irritations, chronic inflammatory symptoms, chronic pain, poor recovery, immune overactivity. And so peptides that can help modulate inflammatory signaling is generally interesting. If KPV becomes available through appropriate compounding pathways, I can see it being considered where inflammation in the clinical picture and we're trying to cool it down, especially in gut and skin-related complaints. Wouldn't oversell it, but I wouldn't dismiss it. Right now, just from clinical experience, I typically use BPC or TB500 or the combination of them over KPV just because it's not really accessible at this time. And so the limitation, anti-inflammatory is one of the most abused terms in wellness. Everything is anti-inflammatory now. Blueberries are anti-inflammatory. Sauna is anti-inflammatory. Walking is anti-inflammatory. Not arguing with strangers on Facebook is probably anti-inflammatory as well. So just because something is labeled anti-inflammatory doesn't mean it's just fixing every inflammatory condition. So the framing I'm going to be putting it with is it's promising for inflammation-related support, especially gut and skin, but it's still got to be matched to the right patient with realistic expectations. MOTS-c is the next one that they're going to be discussing, and this is one I am excited about as well because it touches both metabolism and mitochondria. Anytime you say mitochondria, people buy in. mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell, and apparently are also the powerhouse of wellness marketing. MOTS-c is a mitochondrial-driven peptide studied for metabolic signaling, glucose regulation, AMPK pathways, and exercise-related biology. And so where I see the potential is in the right setting, it's going to have a role in metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, body composition, exercise response, energy regulation, and potentially age-related metabolic decline. And the FDA's review includes MOTS-c with obesity and osteoporosis listed in the Federal Register. That makes sense conceptually. A lot of people are stuck and they're insulin resistant. They have low muscle mass, they have poor mitochondrial efficiency, they have poor cardiorespiratory fitness, and low daily movement. A peptide that may support mitochondrial signaling is going to be helpful. The limitation is it's going to be sold as exercise in a vial, but really MOTS-c is not quite exercise in a vial. If someone tells you that, I think that's just an overhype statement. Because MOTS-c is not going to replace resistance training, adequate protein, caloric control, sleep, daily steps, and actively working on building muscle. Where it may shine is in someone already doing those things and needing support. So the framing that I'm going to use is MOTS-c is one of the more exciting metabolic peptides, but it should be used as a possible amplifier of healthy behaviors, not a replacement for them. Semax is the next one, and another one that I'm excited about because it's usually discussed in the cognitive and neuro support category. People are currently using it for focus, brain fog, mental clarity, mood, stress resilience, and productivity. It's been studied more outside of the US, especially in Russia, and is commonly described as synthetic ACTH fragment-related peptide with potential effects on neurotropic factors and neurotransmitter systems. And so what I see in its potential is a lot of people are just feeling mentally fried. They're sleeping poorly, overstimulated, overcaffeinated, under-recovered, and trying to fix a nervous system problem with another espresso. Me. So a peptide that may support cognitive clarity or neuroregulation is appealing. If Semax becomes available through appropriate channels, we'll definitely be using it for patients looking for cognitive support, and especially if, again, the other things are already being addressed. Working on sleep, stress, nutrition, movement, hormones, metabolic health, and not scrolling until midnight like you're trying to win an Olympic event in a dopamine deletion. The limitation. It's going to be sold as a limitless pill, but it's not going to be a limitless pill. It's not going to turn you into Bradley Cooper in a movie where he suddenly understands the stock market. The human evidence base is not as robust as they're currently saying, and so my framing is going to be that Semax may be interesting for cognitive support, focus, and brain fog type complaints, but it should be used thoughtfully and not sold as an instant genius spray. Epithalon is a longevity peptide, and the longevity space is where hype goes to buy a lab coat. Epithalon is generally discussed around aging biology, telomerase activity, circadian rhythm, pineal signaling, sleep, and health span. And so I think Epithalon is interesting because aging is not just one thing. It's a combination of cellular stress, inflammation, hormonal changes, mitochondrial decline, sleep disruption, loss of muscle, metabolic dysfunction, and accumulated damage over time. So anything that may influence aging-related pathways is worth studying. If Epithalon becomes available through the proper channels, I could see it fitting into a broader longevity discussion. Not quite this is going to make you live forever, but more like, hey, this is a tool in our larger health span strategy. The limitation is telomerase and longevity language can get abused fast. Someone hears telomeres and immediately thinks they found the fountain of youth. But changing a biomarker influencing a pathway is not the same thing as proving longer life, better health span, or better clinical outcomes. There are theoretical concerns anytime we talk about stimulating growth or repair pathways long term, including whether those pathways could have downsides in the wrong context. And so the framing that I'll be using with it is Epithalon is interesting in the longevity conversation, but it should be framed as exploratory and supportive, not quite as the anti-aging guarantee, do this and you'll live forever. The next one is imideltide or DSIP. DSIP acronym for Delta Sleep Inducing Peptide. People are using it for sleep, recovery, stress response, and nervous system regulation. And so again, this has great potential. Sleep is one of the most powerful interventions that we have. If you can improve sleep, you're going to improve recovery, mood, hunger, cravings, testosterone, glucose control, training performance, pain sensitivity, and decision making. And so sleep, again, I've said this several times, is a legal performance enhancing drug nobody wants to prioritize because it doesn't come in a sexy vial. So this is going to start being the sexy vial. And so anything that's going to help support sleep or recovering is definitely interesting. If DSIP becomes available through appropriate channels, we're definitely going to be using it in patients where sleep quality is a major limiting factor. The limitation is sleep problems are rarely just a peptide deficiency. They're often a combination or somewhat contributive sleep apnea, alcohol, stress, poor light exposure, shift work, late caffeine, kids, pain, hormonal issues, or revenge bedtime procrastination, which is a fancy way of saying I was exhausted all day, but at 10:30 I decided I needed 97 minutes of Instagram reels. So DSIP may be useful, but it has to be part of a complete sleep conversation. So the framing that I'll be using is DSIP may have a role in sleep and recovery support, but will not overcome a chaotic sleep environment or untreated sleep disorder. CJC-1295 and Ipamorelin, they're grouped together in the growth hormone secretagogue category. I'm glad they're being talked about again because we do use them pretty frequently and they do well and they seem very safe. So it's going to be nice just to extend access with them. They're used to stimulate the body's own growth hormone signaling rather than directly giving growth hormone. So we're using them mainly for sleep, recovery, body composition, lean mass support, fat metabolism, and overall vitality. And so a lot of adults are struggling with poor recovery, low sleep, reduced training adaptation, lower lean mass, and metabolic decline. And so a therapy that may support growth hormone pulsatility and IGF-1 signaling is going to be interesting, and it already does good in the right patient. But it's not steroids. This isn't take this and become jacked while eating gas station nachos. It's do the work, and these are going to help facilitate better recovery, better sleep, and then over time with continued use, they're going to help improve body composition, again, especially if you're lifting, eating well, and working on all the other big levers as well. Body composition over time, especially if the patient is lifting and eating well, they need to be hitting all the bigger levers to get the most out of them. And so we're already using them, and so potential side effects can be water retention, numbness, or tingling. With high doses of IGF-1, you got to watch glucose and insulin sensitivity and theoretical long-term concerns in anybody with a history of cancer or family history of cancer. But these alone don't seem to have any increased risk. Again, just a spot where we need more human data so I can be more confident in saying that. The FDA has specifically listed Ipamorelin among substances that may pose risk related to immunogenicity, aggregation, peptide impurities, and complexity of characterization. And so this is where labs and patient selection matter. We're kind of using the framing for these is that they may be useful recovery and body composition support, but they need to be monitored and paired with training, nutrition, and sleep. And so the best way to think about peptides is not which one's going to get me shredded. It's what problem am I trying to solve? Are we targeting inflammation, recovery, sleep, metabolism, focus, energy, injury support, body composition? And then we ask, is this patient a good candidate? Are there contraindications? Do we need labs? Are expectations realistic? Is the source appropriate? Is this being monitored? This is medicine. This is different from, here's a vial, good luck, use code TENDON20 at checkout. The foundation still matters, and that's the part that really nobody wants to hear. Peptides work best when there's something to amplify. If you're not training, not sleeping, not eating well, not managing stress, not doing the basics, then peptides are probably going to underwhelm you. They're not magic pixie dust. They're not a personality replacement. They're not going to make up for 6 hours of sleep, 42 ounces of soda, no protein, and a workout plan that consisted of walking from the truck to the recliner. But if someone is already doing the right things, training, eating protein, walking, sleeping, managing inflammation, working on body composition, doing their physical therapy or rehab, getting their labs monitored, then peptides are going to be the cherry on the top. And that cherry matters, but it's still not going to be the whole sundae. And so my honest take is, peptides aren't new. They're not fake, they're not all dangerous, but they're just not all proven. They are medications with lots of potential, and I'm excited to see where they go, and I suspect more and more medications will be peptide-based in the future. And some already have major roles in medicine, and some are extremely promising. I just want more data, more human data, human randomized controlled trials. And this is going to be hard. I mean, it's just so expensive. You know, I've had conversations with a lot of people who's like, why don't they just get BPC-157, an actual medication, because it works so well and we don't really seem to have side effects with it? And it's like, well, to get it to go through all the proper channels, it will probably take $1 to $2 billion with a B. And if these pharmaceutical companies are looking at all of these people already using gray market peptides, if they spend $1 billion, they're going to want to recoup that. And it's going to be hard to recoup whenever they're already being thrown around willy-nilly without any oversight. And so I really don't see it going down the proper channels for a long time. I hope it does at some point. But long story short, some are just being marketed way ahead of what we can honestly say. So the FDA situation has created an interesting problem. By limiting access through accredited compounding pharmacies, it may have unintentionally pushed people towards the exact market that we should be worried about. Research-only use products, unlabeled powders, unclear dosing, questionable sterility, no real oversight. That's not safer. And if we're going to use peptides, I'd rather see them used with appropriate sourcing, medical oversight, risk-benefit discussion, labs when needed, realistic expectations, not fear, not hype, just responsible use. Because peptides are powerful tools, but like any tool, they can be used well or they can be used poorly. A hammer can build a house, but it can also smash your thumb. And right now, a lot of people online are selling hammers to people who have never seen a nail. So if you're interested in peptides, ask better questions. What's the goal? What's the evidence? What are the risks? Where is it coming from? How is it dosed? Who's monitoring this? Who's responsible if something goes wrong? And what foundational habits need to be in place for it to actually help? That's the conversation we need to be having. Not peptides are magic, or not peptides are evil. Peptides are medicine, and medicine should be treated like medicine. And so if you have any questions over this, feel free to reach out. You know, I'm going to be doing another podcast where we discuss peptides in depth later this week, and then the FDA is going to be meeting, and then I'll have more insight. I just kind of wanted to provide some information on the current landscape and just kind of set the tone that, like, yeah, they're awesome, I love them, they do great, but do your part and you'll get more out of them, just like with anything else in life. And so again, if you have any questions, reach out, text or call, we'll be happy to work with you.